Looks like we're live. Good morning,
All right.
everyone. Good morning, everyone. From Los Angeles. Both me and Carlos are in Los Angeles, so good morning to everyone. We're actually late because of me, because I just bought a new pair of headphones with a mic, or a new pair of headset rather. And then the mic wasn't working, so I couldn't figure it out. So I went back to my old trusty pair of or my headset. So we'll have to wait and see how the headset does on the next interview. But today I'm here with my good friend that we both went to college, or we went to the same college. We went to Cal State LA, and I've had a chance to talk to Carlos in the past. He was actually one of the speakers in my documentary in film school. It was called Documentary. So Carlos is going to share his story about being a DACA recipient and being a dreamer, and some of the obstacles that he's had to overcome. So you're in for a treat. I've talked to I've talked to him about a story in the past. He has a really good story. That's why I wanted to have him on, and share his story on the channel with you guys, and hopefully it'll give you guys some motivation and inspiration. But before we get into that, how are you, Carlos?
I'm doing quite well. I'm pretty happy that you had a backup in case your new headset wouldn't work. I think that's a lesson for all of us, right? Always have a backup. Like we want to throw away our old equipment, but maybe we should just keep it on standby just in case the new ones, sometimes don't work out at the moment. But yeah, I'm doing quite well. Thank you very much for asking. I remember back in community college, I took a journalism class. And in one of our final projects, we were supposed to interview each other
Hmm.
as classmates. And the professor said something that I don't think I'll forget. She said, when you're being interviewed, that's going to be a very special time in your life because that's when you're going to be given the attention that oftentimes we never really get, we as individuals. And I think it's really interesting too, because I think every single person has a story to share, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes when we get interviewed a lot, and it doesn't become rare occurrence, it becomes kind of the usual. We tend to take it for granted.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And especially now that we live in the digital age, the idea of podcasting, which was not a thing like not too long ago, right? But now is a thing, does take some getting used to sometimes. I remember when me and another friend, like we were trying to do like this episode for a podcast. He's a guy who's very extroverted, right? So when you're with him in person, like he's very boisterous, very eloquent, very open, but once the camera is shining live, like he'll go like
Like a deer in headlights.
yeah, just like that, like hi. But it takes some getting used to. That's just the way it is.
It does, yeah, definitely. For me, I've never been a photogenic person. I've always shied away from the camera. Even like when it came to like regular stuff, like taking photos with friends or family, I didn't want to be in photos. But when it came to YouTube, it's something that I wanted to do, so I knew how to get used to it. So I'm definitely a lot more comfortable now. But I know how how tough or how intimidating it could seem at times, if especially if you're not used to it. But let's go ahead and jump right into your story. You have a really powerful story, and I wanted you to share with everyone on the channel. So go ahead and let's start the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much, John. Well, basically, how I was thinking of sharing my story is, given the fact that I'm also part of a demographic that many people in the audience also fit into, specifically when it comes to being part of the millennial generation. I assume that many people from your audience, including yourself, we belong to the same generation, which is the millennials, and that entails a lot of things that I would like to get into, probably using my life as an example, but at the same time it could be very relatable because we all went through very much the same thing, and we're all trying to overcome pretty much the same challenges at the same time. And of course, like I would also like to talk a little bit about one of my passions, which is basically Japanese animation as well, in addition to sharing my story. But like John was explaining earlier, I'm one of the participants of the DACA program. So for those of you who don't know, DACA is basically deferred action for childhood arrivals. Or in other words, there's a big demographic population in the United States who were brought to the United States as children. And because of that, you might be the citizen of another country. You know, of course, the majority may be Mexico, but we also have DACA recipients from Asia. We have DACA recipients from Africa, from Europe as well. Because when you're brought to a different country as a young child, it tends to be almost like your adoptive country, right? And the memories that you have of your native country fade away little by little, but it doesn't stop being your native country at the same time. So hence my name, Mexico Taku, because of course that is my native country, and I still do pay homage to it. Um, and so I think that I would describe my situation as being sort of like in the purgatory or the twilight of two nations, right? The United States and Mexico. But at the same time, regardless of where we're from, just because we are millennials, we're also from the twilight or from the purgatory of two great divides, and that is the analog world and the digital revolution. I think John, you and I can both remember a time when the internet wasn't really as predominant. When we as kids we had to go outside and we had to ride our bikes and we had to play with people in person, right?
Hmm.
And we could probably remember reading like Goosebumps novels, or you know actually actually playing with physical toys instead of like some sort of digital wonderland, which is what's going on right now with our younger peers, the generation Z, if I'm not mistaken. They grew into this digital world, and so they cannot understand the world without that constant connection in terms of technology. Whereas we were able to see that transition, and we were able to see the internet at least in its earliest iterations from the 90s. If you remember the dial-up sound, when you tried to connect to the internet and you couldn't use the regular phone, you could either use the internet or use the phone. And when you use the internet, it would take forever for one page to load up, and it'd be a miracle if you were able to watch anything in video or audio format, right? Like if anything, you were waiting like for pictures or for text. So we can appreciate the level of patience that is necessary for things to materialize, right?
What I
We
really wanted to get into was your childhood. If you're comfortable with going into that, kind of like, how you got to here to the states. What are some of the challenges? Is your early childhood something that you're comfortable sharing?
Well, I could already tell you that the biggest challenge was the language. I mean, imagine if you're from another country, but then all of a sudden you find yourself somewhere else, and that other country speaks a different language than you. And so the first phrase that I learned is, I don't speak English. That's the first thing I was taught. So when you're in that situation, it's almost as if you're learning how to swim by being thrown in the deep end. You know what I mean? Right away. It could be a very, I hate to use the word traumatizing because I feel that sometimes it's overused, but to a certain degree, that is the word that could be used. And it's not an easy thing to do, even especially for adults. But as a child, when you're trying to find a sense of belonging, because I think that's part of being human, but especially as a child, you're trying to see where you belong to. The fact that you cannot speak the language of your host country is already alienating enough. And the fact that it takes a long time, years, before you're able to proficiently speak that language, and to be not only to be understood, but to understand, creates a certain wall in communication between you and the world that you're trying to belong to. And so this wall of separation is something that can manifest itself also in terms of how you perceive the world, how you perceive the world in a philosophical but also a psychological sense. So that's one of the challenges. I mean, as a kid, like I would get in trouble without misbehaving because I couldn't understand the teacher. Like substitute teachers would get mad at me, but I couldn't help it. I just couldn't understand them. And I tried my best. I mean, imagine trying your best in something, but still not living up to the standards. So, yes, I believe that my childhood, I could say that for the most part, it was a very positive experience. Uh, but at the same time, I do acknowledge that some of the struggles that I had were very unique. On top of that, sometimes we call the millennial generation the fatherless generation. I did not have a father. And so, how am I going to navigate the world without having a role model? It kind of forced me to try to figure things out quickly. But at the same time, when your environment presents you with extra challenges, it gives you certain strengths as well because you had to develop them. And so, little by little, as I came to be in middle school, they did tests on me and they said, well, it turns out that you're actually, I'm not sure what term they used, but basically they were saying that I was smarter than 98% of the whole student body. And this was after an intervention to see why my grades were so low. What they didn't realize is that the environment that I was in was so toxic. That middle school was so full of bullies, full of um, kids who didn't really want to be there, who were just disruptive in the classroom, that it was no environment to learn. And so my grades would reflect that. But they wanted to know, do I have the capacity to learn? Whoa, he's even above average. The heck? Then at that point, I decided I don't want these meetings anymore. They're annoying. So let me just get good grades to get them off my back. A, A. My report card went through the roof when it comes to the scores because I didn't want these interventions anymore. They were like, the intervention was a success. Yeah, because I wanted you off my back. And the same thing happened in high school. They did an evaluation on me to see what my writing and reading skill level was. And they said, he's already at the college level and he's in high school. So yeah, I did have some level of proficiency when it comes to language, but it ties back to what we were talking about earlier. Having been forced to learn the English language, almost cold turkey, right? Forced me to try to find ways to really incorporate that language both in written and spoken form in a way that reflected eventually on my academic performance. And so I decided to major in English, but it wasn't an easy decision because even back then I knew that a degree in English or the idea of wanting to write books, like you do, I'm not sure. I wasn't even sure back then if that was really that much of a viable option. But I did have a lot of mentors and teachers who basically told me, follow your dreams. If this is your passion, if this is your gift, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it kind of ties back to another topic that we were talking about. What kind of guidance were we given as we grew up? You know, we were not really encouraged to go into the STEM fields, which pay the most. We were told to follow our passions. Sometimes I question if that was always if that was really good advice or not. But at the end of the day, it did lead me to getting a master's degree in teaching English. It did lead me to acquiring the teaching jobs that I have now in LATTC and in a private school in Koreatown. And it did lead me to be able to understand and analyze various pieces of literature from various philosophers and various different books about history and society that fascinate me to this day. Um, so there were a lot of beautiful things that were involved with that. But yes, I would say that my story, is pretty similar to that of many people, but in its own unique way because we all have our own unique stories. And I remember you sharing yours as well, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah. For me, I'm not. My parents are immigrants, but I'm not an immigrant. I was born here, in LA, and some of the things that I like talking to you, about your story, in general. But one of the things that I can really appreciate is that it always reminds me of some of the things that I've taken for granted, like knowing English. I was born here, I grew up here. For me, it's funny because my first language is actually Armenian.
Really?
Yeah, it was when I was about. Well, I get my parents spoke to me in Armenian, and then I didn't learn English until I started watching TV and going to school.
Wow.
So it doesn't. It seems like I only speak English and that's it. But yeah, Armenian was actually my first language. I don't remember experiencing any difficulty. Whenever I went through school, but it's funny because sometimes whenever I think in Armenian, and then I but such a quick transition. I think in Armenian, and then I quickly my brain converts to English. So yeah, well, technically English isn't my first language either, but I want to talk to some of the, again, for me, knowing English and not having to learn it later on in my life is something I take for granted. But I want to learn, what was the process for you like? What was some of the things that you, or what are some of the ways that you learned English, especially when you were growing up?
That's right. I had to cling to the words that were cognates with Spanish words. So if there was a similarity in pronunciation or spelling, that helped me remember those words. But I had to be careful about false cognates because, for example, the word embarrassed and embarazada in Spanish, they might sound similar, but they mean something totally different. Embarazada means pregnant. Embarrassed means that you're ashamed. You don't want to mix them up. That could cause a lot of trouble. But at the same time, a lot of the academic words that we have in English come from Latin roots. So a Spanish speaker, a Portuguese speaker, Romanian, etc., has an easier time learning academic words. That's the thing. But still, like Saturday morning cartoons, the X-Men or the Simpsons or Spider-Man or Superman or Batman, they were all in English. And I had no choice but to watch that because I didn't have, there were no such things as tablets back in the 90s, right? There were no such things as, you had to watch whatever was on TV and it was in English because we're here. So, in order for me to understand it, little by little, I had to pick up on what was going on. All right, so when Batman's punching the bad guys, all right, so they're fighting, they're punching, they're sparring. All right, now I know. When they're arguing, like I have to figure out what the narrative was going on. So it was a combination of cartoons, and not only that, but they say you don't really speak too much like your parents do. You speak like your friends in school do. So little by little, being in an environment with my peers and my friends, helped me evolve alongside with them in the native language, and I mean in the target language, which is an opportunity that not every single immigrant has, because a lot of immigrants, they come as adults. And the fact is that if you start learning a language after puberty, it becomes all the harder. It becomes very difficult at that point because when you're a child, you're sort of your mind is sort of geared towards language acquisition. It wants to acquire its native language. And if you're learning another language in addition to that, that is the prime time to really learn an extra language. So, to a certain degree, I was lucky because prior to puberty is when I started being immersed in English in an English speaking country. And, but when it comes to immigrants that are older, I can completely understand if they would struggle 10 times more than I did. So the language learning struggle, I think, in my case, was more of an identity of an identity challenge too, because language and identity are very much intertwined. And I'm pretty sure you could probably relate to that with Armenian. The Armenian language and the Armenian culture and community are very much intertwined, right? Same thing with the Hispanic community. Spanish, and the Hispanic community are very much intertwined. And when there is a wall of separation in which your family is speaking Spanish, but the school system is speaking English, the entertainment system is speaking English, and little by little you start noticing, sort of nuances, right? Sort of like a blend, what they would call Spanglish, right? It makes this interesting, intricate little mess, which is a perfect way to describe my life. um, but yes, I'm not sure if I was able to answer that well, but that's my answer to your question.
No, yeah, it was a really good answer. Or I mean, it was a great response. Thank you for sharing. You mentioned that you had to learn English from your friends whenever in the earlier stages and then later on in life. That range of time or that period of time, rather. What did not knowing, or I'm sorry, what did or the fact that you didn't speak English that well, did it have an impact on um your ability to make friends at school, or were you able to find other kids that were kind of in the same boat as you, where they were native Spanish speakers but they didn't know English that well?
Well, you realize that the expression kids can be cruel is real. As adults, comments bounce off of us because we have experience. But as a child, you kind of take what kids say. When you're a fellow child, you take it more personally. And one of the things that would happen in middle school, if I would speak, you know, kids who were born in the United States, even if they were Hispanic, they would make fun of the way that I spoke. You could probably still notice an accent to this day in the way that I speak a Spanish accent. It was a lot heavier back then. And so when people would mimic you or just make fun of the way that you spoke, that is a direct comment on your ability to communicate. And the message or the words that you have to say are closely related to your heart, and so that's sort of like saying there's something very wrong with you. You're lacking something, you're unable to do something. And back then too, kids would make fun of your appearance as well. You know, that's something that was very common. As you get older, you learn to kind of brush these things off. But I could already tell you right here and now that middle school was one of the worst experiences in my whole life. High school was better, community college was a lot better. Little by little, things started to improve. And I think adulthood is probably the best period of my life because it entails the most amount of freedom, my own expendable income, my own ability to be anywhere that I want to be in my own free time, you know, and I cherish that very strongly. When it comes to my school experience, it almost felt like a prison, and even the school itself looked like a prison. Barbed wires, walls, and everybody was forced to eat in 15 minutes or something and then go to class, and then when your class you're supposed to sit down and be quiet, and then you're shuffled on to the next place. It felt like a prison, and to a certain degree it really was. I couldn't wait to get out of school. I couldn't wait for vacation. And however, even within school, I kind of learned to overcome challenges thanks to joining the wrestling team in high school. It was a very good experience because I was able to form deep bonds with teammates. And the wrestling coach that I had pretty much taught us all to bite the bullet, to do hard things in order to do great things. He said, if you if you do things that others don't want to do now, you'll be able to do what others cannot do in the future. And that would go along with our practices, our morning runs, our exercises after school, our wrestling tournaments, and things like that. It's a mentality that pretty much stuck with me for the rest of my life, and it's I believe what got me through college or higher education. And it's the type of mentality that is pushing me forward even to this day, which it's very challenging, of course, in this economy. But imagine back then, let's say we graduated around '06, '08, more or less from high school, right? We were graduating into a big financial crisis, the financial crisis of '08, which was a dream killer for many people. And to a certain degree, it entailed arrested development. Because people in our generation, by our age now, we're supposed to have a white picket fence. We're supposed to have our own house with a dog, and I don't know what else. A lot of us have not reached that point yet, even those of us who are working very hard at it. So, yes, I would say that one of the highlights of my life is reaching adulthood. It is one of the best stages of my life because I'm able to basically live my life how I like it, focus time on my hobbies, and not be forced to go here and there or do this and that. Because I feel like when you're a child, you have very little control over your life, even though at the same time it does provide a certain sense of security.
Yeah, you brought up some really good points there. You brought up the white picket fence, and then the typical American dream image. Um, for me, one of the other things that you said, that kids are cruel, and then they make fun of you, and perhaps you had some trouble fitting in socially. I can relate to that, in the sense that I talked about on the channel. I grew up as an overweight kid, and yeah, it can be really taxing on you mentally, and just like you said, as a kid you don't know, but as an adult you're able to kind of filter out, and you know not accept the comments that that people make. But as a kid you don't know any better. You just you kind of
That's
take it
true.
in, and then there's essentially no release. It's like, who are you going to talk to about it, right?
That's
um
right.
and I was thinking, because you struggled with or you didn't know English in the beginning when you came to this country, or you knew very little, and you became are you an ESL teacher, or what is your exact title?
Yes, that would be so. I purposefully teach adults. I've been a substitute teacher at the elementary, high school level, middle school level, but I find myself best performing when I'm teaching adults. So, and I chose that profession very purposefully too, because it's like a passport to the rest of the world. When you have DACA, you never know if it's going to be renewed. You never know if a politician's going to get rid of it from one day to another. So that's basically my passport in case I have to leave the country
Can
and
you
teach English
for
abroad.
people do for sorry to cut you off, for people who don't know or aren't familiar with DACA, can you explain what it is in a nutshell?
Right. DACA is basically a program that grants workers permits to people who are brought in as children, as immigrants, you know, and as undocumented immigrants. And it was installed by the Obama administration because they realized that there's this segment of the population who did not come into the country out of their own will, but because they were brought into the country as children. And because of that, they wanted to provide some sort of relief as people are waiting for some sort of immigration reform to provide a permanent solution to this issue. But of course, this kind of issue has been in Congress since 2001, I believe. So it's 2022, and still there has been no comprehensive immigration reform. And if you ask me, I highly doubt that there will be any anytime soon. So that's why I make my own preparations in case I have to leave, and that would be perfectly fine. The only difficulty would be the logistics of having to go, having to figure out how to survive in a country that you've probably never haven't been to for more than half your life, right? But of course, that's part of the reasons why I majored in teaching English as a second language, because that's in demand around the world, and I could definitely find employment in other countries, specifically teaching adults, or As I am at this current time, one of the classes that I teach is business English. So English being the lingua franca of the world, it's also the language of business, of international trade and communication and entertainment, et cetera, et cetera.
Sorry, I've been having to mute my mic because the dog next door is going crazy.
I can't really hear the background noise. You must have a really good setup.
Well, what I mean by Mike, he's going crazy whenever I unmute it. Then he's for some reason stops barking, but which is good. He's cooperating. He's helping us out.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned that you teach adults, which I thought you were actually teaching children, which teaching adults is probably a little bit more harder or a little bit more difficult because they're not in the point, and obviously they're coming to school because they want to learn, but at the same time their mind is probably not as ready to absorb the new information as they would when they were a child, right? Um, so
Yes.
have you taught children as well, or just solely adults?
Um, well, I grew up with nieces and nephews, so um, because I'm the youngest of my siblings, I've had a lot of nieces and nephews. So basically, I come to know, how it's like to have to interact with kids, but not at the educational level. I've substituted in elementary schools, but I realized quickly that's not for me. I work better with adults because adults will understand you quicker and you don't have to babysit them, I hope, right? Even though sometimes adults act like kids these days, but it's easier to work with adults, trust me, in that regard. However, when it comes to learning the language, you're right. It's easier for kids to learn any language. So I would recommend to anyone, if you want your kids to learn another language, you want to start now. You want to start now that they're children, and put them into some sort of language learning program. I would highly recommend that to anybody.
There's one thing that you brought up earlier that I really wanted to touch on. No, there he goes. Um, One thing that I wanted to touch on was that you talked about the American dream and the image of the white picket fence and the dog and the being a homeowner and stuff like that. When you're coming to, I mean, how old were you when you came to the U.S.?
That's a good question. I was 6 years old.
Okay, so I'm sure it's hard to remember some of the thoughts that you had when you're 6 years old, but sometimes we remember our thoughts through our emotion, right? Because sometimes whenever we go through a traumatizing experience, not saying you went through a traumatizing experience necessarily, but the things that that there are some things that we remember because, like, for me, for my example, I remember how I was treated in school. I remember the thoughts, but I remember the feelings, and as a result of those feelings, I remember what I was thinking. Do you remember some of the thoughts that you had when you came when you migrated to US as a 6 year old?
It was a confusing experience, John. I can tell you that much. I mean, when I was in Mexico, there was so much talk about Los Angeles, about California, about the United States. At one point, you know, thank you very much, Rodney. At one point, I was wondering, all right, so what is the difference between Los Angeles and California and the United States? Where exactly are we going? Why? you know? And so all I knew is that it's this other place, other country. At six, you're still wondering what the heck a country is, right? It's supposed to be. But it's this other place. This is the flag. They speak English. How do you know if somebody speaks English? If you don't understand them, that means they're speaking English. So it was a very confusing time because as a kid you're trying to piece it together. So what's going on? Why? How? Where? But little by little you start to realize that people in the United States are very different than you. We don't have the same cultural reference points. We don't have the same historical reference points, or the people who are famous in Mexico are not always famous to an American. So there's a breakdown in communication. And as a child, it was hard for me to really piece things together. So it was a very confusing experience to leave it at that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. one of the things that going back to the topic of the American dream, a lot of people when I talk to them, they talk about having the ability to become a homeowner, and the white picket fence, so to speak, that everyone refers to. Again, I was born here in Los Angeles. My parents are immigrants, so I can kind of share their story and relate to from their point of view, right, and what they've explained to me, what their story is. My both of my parents learned English, well, from Lebanon, because they're both from Lebanon, and they left Lebanon because of essentially Syria was senselessly bombing Lebanon back in the 80s. So they decided to get their documents, their paperwork, whatever was necessary, and come here to the U.S. And they've actually been U.S. citizens for maybe 15, 20 years now. It's insane. Because yeah, they got it when I was a kid. I remember when they were sworn in to become citizens. It was a very proud moment, especially for them. But my father, he actually didn't know English that well. He might have been in a similar position as you. It was just a foreign language to him, so he actually had to learn it along the way. And he's back in Lebanon. He was actually a really popular electric contractor. But when he came here, from what he told me, he basically had to take odd jobs like scrubbing toilets and just to make a little bit of money to eat, right. And then gradually he started learning English, and he started running his business, which he's a really successful electric contractor now, and he's a really good example of hard work and what you can make out of yourself whenever you come to the U.S. as an immigrant. So hear me out. Whenever people think of the white picket fence and the dogs and all that stuff, they refer to that as the American dream. But personally, from uh, my, looking at it from an immigrant point of view, I think the American dream is about opportunity to become the person that you want, because you might not have had the same opportunities in your home country, right? For whatever reason, it might be political turmoil, or it might be inflation. Do you think the American dream is more about opportunity and to become yourself, rather than just buying a house and a dog and a white picket fence and all that?
Right. I think related to what you were saying, it has to do a lot with the idea of a fresh start, of a brand new opportunity to reinvent yourself. Like you were saying, the story of the people who came from Lebanon because their country was being bombed. They were suffering from warfare. They need an environment in order to have a fresh start, away from that type of environment. And your parents who came from Armenia, we know that the Soviet Union broke into little pieces after the 90s, right? So that environment, there was a need to find something fresh and new, and the United States became that. I would say that to many people around the world, they search for those types of opportunities in the United States, and I can completely understand that. In fact, just last Sunday, somebody that I know, was explaining how her father basically came from North Korea, right? Um, so there's always stories. There's always stories, and these stories come back to the idea of trying to find a fresh start. And the United States has historically been one of the places where people could find that. So yes, I think the American dream, we stereotypically call it the white picket fence and a dog and I don't know what, and the 2.5 children, or who knows how that even looks like. But it's actually something deeper, and we've seen it manifest in the immigrant community, right? We notice how the immigrant community, they try not to take things for granted, and they work because they know how difficult it was from where they came. It's a little concerning, however, to notice how, once the second, third generation starts popping in, people start taking things for granted. It's human nature, but it happens. And it's a good thing to remind ourselves, hey, let's not get too comfortable. Let's remember that everything we have, somebody had to earn it. And we also have to earn our share as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point that you brought up, because in the past few live streams on this channel, you or some other people that have joined the live stream, we've talked about how basically a lot of people feel entitled, and they're just giving stuff. Do you think that And again, I'm really glad you brought this up because I wanted to kind of get into I'm not an immigrant myself. I'm born here, but my parents, I saw how hard they had to work, to provide for me and my sister when we were kids, and I'll be forever grateful for that. Do you think that being an immigrant or even being a child being a child of parent or immigrant parents, do you think that work ethic is still instilled in you whenever, well, because of the mindset is that if you don't work then you don't eat, essentially. Um do you think that the immigrant mindset is something that hmm,
Is it something transferable, right, from generation to generation?
yeah, exactly.
I think to a certain degree it is, because even if we look at people who were born in the United States and whose parents were also born here, if you go back far enough, somebody is likely to be an immigrant in that lineage. And even Native Americans, which, by the way, I'm 40% indigenous as well, we came from the Bering Strait back in the Ice Age, right? So, this whole continent, if you're a human, somewhere along the line, there was some sort of migration. And I think this is passed on and on and on when it comes to our cultures, our traditions, our outlooks, and our way of doing things. So, I do believe in the immigrant work ethic, but I also believe that if you're not an immigrant, there's a lot of that in you as well. That's my point of view.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective, because a lot of especially in college, whenever I've talked about on the channel whenever I went to San Diego State. I think we were talking about it on Saturday or Sunday, I don't remember, on the live stream here on the channel. When I went to San Diego State, it's such a culture shock because a lot of people, they came from families who are well off, and they didn't have to worry about work. They didn't have to worry about money. All they had to do was do good in school and enjoy the time there. But me coming from a working class family, struggling to pay rent every month, trying to stay afloat on my classes and all those things. So being from, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud to be part of the working class, because no one told me. My parents, they haven't explicitly told us, but I'm sure they want me to have a better life than they did. So they try to
Absolutely.
make sure
Yes,
that I have a comfortable life, and I don't go through a lot of the same struggles as they did. But it's just
that's
in me,
right.
man. It's just in my DNA. I want to work my I want to work my ass off, and I want to work for what I have, and I have been doing that. You know,
Yeah, of
that
course.
being said, um, do you think, I guess, do you think a lot more people can learn from that, because people have to realize that whatever's being given to us, they can't take it for granted. Do you think that especially with people asking for universal basic income and things like that, do you think people can do a little bit better job of working harder in this country?
Well, I mean, I will definitely answer the UBI question in a moment, but I want to also comment on what you just mentioned, that university where most people come from privileged backgrounds, and you found yourself having to struggle a little more just to catch up, right? But John, can we not say that the fact that we had to struggle a little bit more instilled in us certain lessons and abilities that if it wasn't for that we would not have? Is that not true? And one of the dangers of coming from a privileged background is because if everything was handed to you, then you're lacking that work ethic and you're in danger of losing what was given to you. It's hard to keep it if you're not sure how to earn it. It's hard to appreciate it. When you do appreciate things, it's because you know you've earned it, right? Now, the idea of UBI, I mean, I'm not an expert on it. I could understand why there would be a certain need for it. But another thing that Well, at least this is my own personal opinion. Maybe people in the chat, maybe yourself can correct me if I have a different if I'm mistaken. But the economy of any nation, of any society, requires a certain level of productivity. And we need to add that level of productivity, expertise, and skills just to make things function. I mean, how many people nowadays are able to change a flat tire, are able to change plumbing, are able to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, provide clean water to a city? We still need to be able to do that. And this whole idea about let's receive, UBI so that, the artist and the philosopher can show their beauty and be prolific and stuff like that. That's great. But at the same time, we still need to roll up our sleeves and make things work. And we need people who know how to do that. Um, so, as it relates to UBI, with or without it, there's still going to be a very powerful need for work, for productivity, for et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I can see where some people would need it. I think it should be in on a situational standpoint because the way they're and I don't want to get into politics because this is not what this channel is about. Um, I could see UBI being helpful to people. Maybe they're having a tough time at the moment in their lives, but the way they're explaining UBI is that they want to just to give it everyone, and we saw what happened during the pandemic. What happens when you give everyone just free money? The prices go up, so you're kind of playing cat and mouse. You're giving people more money, but then everything's getting more expensive. So you're not really giving, or you're not making a lot of progress there. But back to going back on topic. Let's talk about college. We both went to Cal State LA. What was that experience like for you? Did you kind of did you kind of find yourself coming into your own, learning more as a person? What was it? Uh, do you think it was a better experience than middle school or even high school?
It was an amazing experience, John. I loved it. I was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, there were all sorts of clubs, the philosophy club, the music club, the blah 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 this and that, and I was able to learn about so many different things, take all sorts of classes, meet so many interesting professors and classmates and people, go to student events and stuff like that. It was amazing. And so my college experience was almost like a little renaissance in my life where I was able to dabble into so many various topics, read various types of books. It felt so refreshing. So I would say that overall it was positive. And let me tell you something too. This might sound a little bit controversial, but I feel that I learned a lot more in community college than I did in university or grad school, especially. Community college was one of the most knowledge inducing, fostering environments that I've ever been to, the most prolific environment. Um, I can't explain why, but I can explain that that is a fact. I've learned so many different things and met so many wonderful people in community college, in East Los Angeles College, one of the least appreciated colleges in this area. No, so yes, I would say that that's how my experience has been in college. How about yourself, if I may ask?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've talked about on channel once or twice. I actually did have a better experience at community college level too. I don't know if that had to do with the class sizes, but I've actually formed relationships with professors that I've even a couple of counselors that I still keep in touch with to this day. That wasn't the case at San Diego State and Cal State LA because I don't know if it's because bigger sized classrooms or professors just they seem like they have more work to do. Maybe it was administration related or I'm not sure. But yeah, community college it definitely felt more fostering and not that professors didn't seem approachable at the 4 year level, but it just seems like it was a lot easier to talk to professors after class or before class or try to get in touch with them because also a lot of them they were teaching the subject out of passion. Like for my business law class, the professor, I don't remember her name, but she was awesome. She was an attorney. After she would finish teaching class in the morning, she would go do her attorney stuff, whatever it is that attorneys do, because I'm not familiar with it. But as we're getting closer to it, the 1 hour mark here with 10 minutes left. For me, college was a really it was a is a huge eye opener too, because when I finished high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Um, you know, when I was 18, I was 18, 20 while I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I actually went to a PCC, Passing City College, for a semester, and I ended up dropping out. And then after that, I went to LA Valley College, which is in the same school district as East LA College, ELAC. Again, I agree. It's people take it for granted. People complain about when our hold on the financial aid, or when they're trying to get in touch with the financial aid office. But you know whenever you apply for financial, you get the fee waiver and all that stuff. So you're basically going to school for free. It's not free. It's on a tax paradigm, but you're not also not paying for anything out of your pocket. So with that being said, if you were to give advice to someone who's in a similar who might be in a similar position as you might not be able to get through someone who's 6 years old, but let's say you're talking to someone in high school who kind of went through the same experience as you did, being a dreamer and a DACA recipient from Mexico or from a different country. What type of advice would you give them?
Well, that's a good question. To add to that, there's actually one other factor that I forgot to mention, which is the fact that I was diagnosed with Asperger's. So, as a lot of people might know, that is being part of the autism spectrum, the high functioning part. So, because of that, I had a lot of difficulty understanding body language or understanding people's nonverbal cues. And so my social skills were to a certain degree impaired. It's a disability. And so people who it's very tough to explain, and it's very tough to give advice to people who might be in that type of situation. Um, and I'm not sure if I'm really in the position to give advice, but I think one of the things that worked for me is to be curious, to appreciate knowledge and to try to figure things out, make it into some sort of adventure, make life into some sort of adventure where you're trying to piece things together and figure it out, and let's see where it goes. That's what makes it exciting.
Honestly, I wasn't expecting you to say that. We've talked so many times, and I thought you were going to give a different answer, but I'm glad you did give that one, because now that's got me thinking, which is always a good thing. Yeah, I feel like people can take more chances nowadays. I know with everything being super expensive as it is, but I'm 33. I have no kids. I'm not married, and that's by design, because I want to grow. If I have kids and get married, it's gonna be a lot harder for me to take risk and travel and try to find myself, at least for right now. It's you said being curious, and I think that being curious, it could mean so many different things, or it could be done so many different ways, rather. And I know this whole conversation, this whole stream, it's kind of been over the place, but it's been a really good conversation. There was one last question I wanted
Absolutely.
to ask you. It's slipping from my mind right now. If I remember, I'll ask you. But hmm, yeah, for some reason it slipped my mind. But
I bet you're going to remember the minute we finish this live stream. Like as soon as you click end live stream, that's when you'll remember. And then you'll message me, I remember what I was going to tell you. God, why did I just. Anyway, that happens to
yeah,
everyone. We
probably.
remember right after we need to remember.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, now I remember. Um,
Ah,
I
all right.
was like, think, John, think. I got the hamster on the wheel going. So one of the things that you brought up earlier in the conversation is that you you had trouble, or not trouble, but you came to the U.S. and you didn't speak English that well, but you learned it, and I'm super proud of you. I
Thank
know
you.
learning a language is, it's not easy. I'm still trying to learn Spanish, to believe it or not. I took Spanish 1 and 2 at college, and then Spanish 3 was something else. Spanish 1, it was easy because we were learning the usted, the ustedes, and things like that. But the,
Hang out at the taco stand long enough and you'll learn all the bad words. That's probably all you need to know anyway.
well, in college and in Armenia is similar too, but in the school setting they teach you the formal stuff.
That's right, yes.
And we actually had a lot of native Spanish speakers, but they didn't speak formal Spanish. They knew a lot of slang, and the
That's
teacher
right.
basically had to correct them.
Yes.
Um, she was a really good teacher. She's actually from Argentina rather.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
back to the question that I wanted to ask you. Earlier on, you mentioned that you had to learn English whenever you got here, and now you're teaching English, to adults, which I give you props, man. It's very commendable. I don't think I would have the patience for that. I have very little patience. I'm not a very patient person, but well, I guess I can be, for things that I enjoy. But
Well,
you
you
know,
you were patient enough with me in this live stream, so I can tell that there's patience there too.
dude, I can hear you talk all day. Trust me, you have an amazing
Thank
story and a great perspective. Um,
you.
for me, compare, kind of similar to my struggles. I've struggled with, being overweight kid, and constantly being, well, not constantly, but me, frequently being made fun of in school, not, having trouble, finding, creating friendships, and when I was a kid, and even my dating life, it was difficult in the beginning because I didn't know who I was, and I just listened to whatever people told me. But do you think that things become full circle because now I'm what I call a routine coach. I want to help people see them succeed, and you're teaching English. Do you think life becomes full circle, and we kind of go into a profession where it's something that's kind of affected us as a child?
Yes. One of the themes that we could probably pick up is the fact that we can surprise people in a positive way. I mean, I remember you sharing the story of when you were a child and you were picked last in basketball class or whatnot, or PE when it comes to playing basketball. But then they would see your skills, then you were picked first, right? A similar thing happened in my wrestling team. There was this wrestler who was a little chubby, and then like I was about to wrestle him, and he's all like, well, "What's that, Carlos? You didn't expect me to be this fast, huh? You didn't expect me to be like that." Like, whoa! And he won. So it's a pleasant surprise. I mean, I think that's what life teaches us, is that sometimes surprises don't have to be scary. They could be really interesting too. They could be really fun.
Yeah, definitely. That's what makes life fun, right? Surprises. If life
Yeah.
was always predictable, and it went the way you thought it would, then it'll be boring. What's the point? But as we get the last few minutes of the conversation, do you have any closing thoughts to share with the audience?
Um. Well, thank you everybody who watched this live stream. Please continue to follow John McKellion. Um, I'm very confident that there will continue to be very insightful stories, very insightful messages, uh, very wonderful books that John writes. And in fact, this is where I have my shameless plug. So, if you'd like to learn more about DACA, I wrote a book, and I believe that there might be a link to it in the description. Also, there's a book about some of
I'll,
the poetry that I wrote.
I'll add it to the show notes after the stream. I wasn't able to add it right now or before the show.
Yeah, no worries. And so my English degree has to be worth something. So there's one book about poetry. I was able to write some poems. Yay! I can't change a flat tire, but I can write a poem, and there's the proof. Shameless plug. So I'd like to leave it at that. And thank you very much, guys. I also have a channel called Mexico Taku where I review anime. I think that anime is one of the most interesting genres out there because it relates to a lot of what we were talking about, the idea of hard work, of earning your stripes, of not giving up, of finding hope. So, yes, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Also, are you on Instagram, or do you have any social media that people like, or you would like them to follow you at?
Well, for now, just that YouTube channel.
YouTube channel. Okay.
I try to be a little bit detoxed when it comes to social media, trying to get back into the analog things of books, physical books, walks in nature, appreciating the real world outside of the digital world a little bit more. But yeah, I do dabble into content creation a little bit just for fun.
Awesome. So if you want to get in touch with Carlos and follow his work, check him out. Mexico Otaku is his YouTube channel. Um, for me, for my closing thoughts, Carlos and I were just two examples of of what hard work can take you. You can and I'm not trying to say that in a boisterous manner, or trying to brag or anything, but use this as an example, use this as inspiration, because Carlos is an immigrant from Mexico, and he didn't know English, and he had to learn it. And for me, basically, I'm not an immigrant myself, but my parents are, and we Carlos and I both have that immigrant work ethic, where if you don't work, then you don't eat, essentially. And it was the same thing in college. But yeah, just if you're in a tough spot right now, just make sure remind yourself that everything tends to work itself out as long as you keep working harder, as long as you keep staying consistent. And that's pretty much it for me. Thanks to everyone who stopped by in the chat. Appreciate you guys watching. If you guys have any comments for me or Carlos, comment in the comment section below once the video or the YouTube post or it gets processed. Did you want to say something, Carlos?
Oh, yes, John, I'd like to add one more thing.
Sure.
So, to whoever's watching this, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of your audience, could be very close friends as well. So, guys, John is providing a very good service for us, giving us his insights and his advice, really working hard for us. And I think we should also keep cheering him on, keep giving him positive vibes and the thumbs
Appreciate
up,
that.
because he also needs our feedback and support. So let's keep it both ways. He's helping us a lot. Let's help him out too with some positive reinforcement. So that's my closing thoughts as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, YouTube's definitely a grind, but I enjoy talking to people like you and all the other guests that I've had on the channel. But YouTube's a grind, but the content and the interactions, with people like you and everyone else in the chat, everyone else, in the community, definitely makes it worthwhile. But yeah, thanks to everyone who stopped by. Thank you guys for watching. Again, if you have any comments for me or Carlos, leave it in the comment section. Once the video posts to YouTube and YouTube process and all that good stuff. But catch you guys in the next one. Peace.